Hey guys, this is Cameron with Fishing Addicts Northwest and Gone Catching Guide Service. And in this tutorial today, we're going to be showing you guys how to plunk for steelhead on a very high raging river here in the Northwest. Now, most of us that want to get out there in our drift boats and in our sleds, you know, when the water gets high and kind of murky and kind of dangerous, sometimes it's not the best to do so. These steelhead are going to run along these edges, and plunking can be a very effective way to target them, so stay tuned. So traditionally when we're steelhead fishing, we're using real light rods, you know, 6 to 12s, 8 to 15s. But in this situation here, when you're going to be casting a heavy lead, you're fishing some heavy currents, and you might be catching some big steelhead, you're going to want to up your game a little bit. A 15 to 30 rod that's got some length, that 9.5, 10.5 foot length, just to be able to keep that line angle up off the water so it's not dragging in the current, and keeping your presentation where you're going to want to be is going to be crucial. So what I'm going to be using today is the Okuma Guide Select in a 15 to 30 and a 10.5 foot rod. And I'm also going to want to use a line counter reel just for the same reason that we do when we plunk the big water of the Columbia. If you catch fish at a certain distance out in your line and you want to replicate where those fish are running on other rods on the bank or on the same rod that just caught the fish, having that line counter is super important for making sure you get in that right spot where the fish are running. When the water's high like this, the fish are really going to run in very dedicated travel lanes and seam lines where it's going to be the path of least resistance. So if you do find a fish or you do get a strike, being able to put it back out in that same spot is really important. For that, I've got the Okuma Low Pro Line Counter Reel. So since this is like my heavy salmon setup, I've also got my braided line, anything in a 30 to 50 pound, but just any braided line is going to do. You're going to want a braided line just because it's got a thinner line diameter, so it's not going to drag as much in the heavy current and in the water versus like a 30 pound or a 40 pound monowheel, and you're going to be able to use less weight and you're going to be able to stay in that same spot. So the braided line is super important. It also gives you some abrasion resistance for if you're running that line up against some rocks, or if you get a fish on that gets around some kind of debris. Because a lot of times when you're fishing high water, there's going to be like bushes and logs that are going to be submerged that you might have to work around. And now to the business end, guys. This is a very simple setup. I'm going to start with just adding a slider to my line that I'm going to do about a 6-inch dropper on. One thing about steelhead, especially in high water, is they are going to hug to the bottom. The current that's along the bottom of the river is generally slower than the current that's on top. So these fish are going to be down, they're going to be within a foot of the bottom. So I don't need to go with a real long dropper here, but all I've got is about a 6-inch dropper with a little clip on it so I can just attach my weight. And I've got a real light line to where if I snag, that this could break off and I'll be able to keep the fish on the line or at least get most of my gear back. Attached to a slider, got a little bead to protect it. And then I've got a bead chain. And the use of a bead chain right here is really important because if you're going to be using a spin and glow with bait, it is going to have some spin that's going to spin up the line. That bead chain is going to eliminate that twist from going up your line and fouling your braid up at a later time. So now moving on to the leader, what I have here is a 20 to 25 pound test fluorocarbon. I've got it about 3 feet long. The reason why I want to use that heavier leader is because if I get a hot fish that's going to go barreling out into the current, I'm going to need to bring him back. I've also got lots of logs and debris and sticks down here that, you know, I'm going to need that extra power to bring that fish in, especially in these currents and in these conditions. With the cloudier water, I'm not going to need anything real light. This isn't a real subtle presentation that's going to go drifting by these fish. The way these fish are going to move upstream and approach this bait, they're going to be seeing this part of the bait first, and I'm not going to need to use a real light line for that. So making sure that I'm going to capitalize on my hookups, I'm going to use a heavy line. Like I said, about 3 foot is all I'm going to need to my spin and glow, which is about the size of a quarter. I've got that extra corky there to add a little more float and act as my bead just to protect my knot. And then I've got a Mustad 3/0 beak bait hook. Okay, so for my location, guys, a lot of these rivers, these fish, when the water gets high, they travel. They're going to be moving up. They're taking the opportunity to get up to where they want to go to spawn. So a lot of times, you know, your particular spots that you would normally fish when the water is like kind of normal level or even low level aren't going to be where you're fishing when it's high. You got to think that these fish are running like race cars up the river. They got to go around this point, they're going to go around that point. They've got to move through all the water. When the water's high, you're going to get a lot of these areas that you've got nice seam lines that are just sitting off the bank. Traditionally, you're going to want some little maybe areas that are just a little bit slower than the main current, kind of like what I got right here in this situation. And honestly, right here, I wouldn't even normally fish this particular spot when the water's normal or when the water's low. But those fish moving upstream are going to come cruising right up where that current break is and just keep cruising up along this bank. So I'm going to make sure I put my gear in front of them. So in this particular river, it's legal to use bait. And like I say, a lot of our steelhead fishing, whenever you've got the opportunity to use bait, do so. That extra scent and that extra attractant in this high murky water will key those fish into your offering, and hopefully you'll get even more strikes with it. I am gonna say one thing though, is that if you're plunking along a river that's only got wild fish, this particular setup is kind of like back trolling. You've got the opportunity to hook a steelhead probably in the way that you're not gonna want to, because like I said, you're using bait. They have a tendency to really take the bait in deep. So if you're only fishing a river that's got wild fish on it, or maybe during that time frame, you might want to stay away from the bait and check out our other tutorial on casting on plunking plugs in tributaries for high water, for one of those techniques that's not going to potentially mortally hook a fish. However, in this river right now, we've got some hatchery fish running in there, so I'm going to throw a little bait on there to show you guys how it's done. All right guys, so I've got my favorite coon shrimp here. I've got my millennial coonies, and like I said, you can use anything from a coon stripe shrimp to Atlantic prawn to a bait of eggs to a pink worm to some plastic eggs that just got some extra scent. But having something that's just on the back of that that's going to be a little more enticing to the fish isn't going to hurt you, especially since you're casting out that presentation and it's going to be there for a while. So adding scent, I also strongly recommend adding any kind of aftermarket scent that you have. I've got some ProCure water soluble fish oil of the Anise Plus. Got some of the gel of the Anise Plus, and of course our addicted water soluble winter chrome blend. All great options. Experiment with what you want. Adding a little more extra scent to your presentation, like I said, to just draw those fish in, entice a strike, especially if the water's cold, can be extremely beneficial. All right guys, so now I'm gonna add a coon shrimp. Got a nice little coon shrimp right there. And all I'm gonna do, just to make this super simple for us today, is I'm gonna take the hook, I'm gonna go right where that meat attaches to the carapace, push that up. I'm gonna seat that hook right there. I'm gonna take my egg loop out, wrap it around the tail, and use that egg loop just to hold that shrimp tail nice and tight against the shank of the hook. Now I'm just gonna add a little bit of bait sauce, and what I like to do with this guy is I like just make sure that I get it all up underneath the legs there of the coon shrimp. There's a lot of area that can hold that bait. I mean, a coon striped shrimp, especially a millennial coonie, is good enough. Like, steelhead will bite this as is all day long. Like I said, high muddy water, high turbid water, you know, having a little extra just never hurt anybody. I'm all baited up, got my presentation ready. I'm gonna clip on my weight and cast her out and see what happens. Now, being that these steelhead are running against the bank, I am not gonna cast this thing out in the middle of the river. Those fish aren't running there. They're gonna be running just right here off this seam line. So all I'm gonna do is just a nice little flip. Boom. I like it. Find a spot where it settles. Into the rod holder she goes. All right, so we're fishing, guys. Now basically what I'm looking for is, obviously I'm gonna look for a steelhead to come along. He's gonna start nibbling on all that bait, and when he swims it off, you're gonna see the bite. If all goes to plan, I'm gonna set the hook on the fish. Hopefully that weight's gonna come up out of the bottom. Just in case it doesn't, that line is gonna break and I'm gonna end up losing my lead, which is gonna suck because those things are like $3 a piece. But the fish will hopefully take off and I'll be able to bring him in. But now I'm just gonna sit and wait. It's gonna be a waiting game, just on the account that those fish have gotta move up through this seam line, and sooner or later, one's gonna move up into that travel lane and see that bait. So while we're waiting for a strike, guys, I'm gonna go through a couple variations of my presentation that you could match to the conditions that you're fishing. Today I've got about 4 foot of visibility, so I elected to go with a smaller spin and glow that's just gonna be enough to float the bait, and I went with a smaller coon shrimp. However, if the visibility was maybe only like a foot, maybe 1.5 foot of vis, I would like to go with a larger spin and glow, maybe one that's got a little more flash. They make different variations that you have with mylar wings, brighter colors, and I would even go with a bigger bait. I mean, just a bigger presentation that the fish are more likely to see when they're cruising by might mean the difference in getting an extra strike or two. So, you know, you're gonna wanna do that. And just like with all steelhead fishing, you know, you're gonna wanna match the size of that presentation just to the conditions. Same thing with plunking. So we've been here a little while, guys, and just like any plunking spot, you're gonna wanna give your baits a lot of time to marinate in those seam lines just to make sure you know if some fish are moving through them. You know, this is not a technique that you're gonna wanna cast here for 5 minutes, get anxious, cast here for 5 minutes, cast here for 5 minutes, and then move on. You've gotta commit some time to these seam lines and to those travel lanes so fish will hopefully move up and you'll get a strike. You know, another thing you can also do, which I've done quite a few times over the high water years that we've had, is I'd come down to the riverbank, bring the kids, bring the wife, you know, maybe you find a spot that you can park the car kind of close if the weather's a little, you know, kind of cruddy or inclement, and bring your bobber and worm rods. The water that you're trying to plunk right now is the same water that you're going to want to drift on these inside seams when the water's so high with your bobber and worm gear. So it's a good opportunity probably to do both. If you guys like what you see here, make sure you guys, as always, subscribe to our channel, Addicted Fishing. We'd love to have you as a sub. And also, don't forget, every Sunday, be sure to check out our Addicted Life episodes. And also, if you guys are looking for any of the apparel that you guys see us wearing in these addicted videos, be sure to check out our website, www.addicted.fishing, and check out our store there. We've got lots of good steelhead gear, lots of good clothing and stuff online. With that being said, we thank you guys for all the support that you guys give us. We appreciate it every day. We'll see you guys out in the water.